Big Shaq's daughter walked into the world's top culinary school like a rookie, but cooked like a ghost from the Michelin elite. They mocked her name, doubted her fire, until the dish they tried to bury became the one they couldn't ignore. What happens when quiet brilliance meets loud prejudice? What if the prodigy you tried to humiliate was already a legend? And what if her father was Big Shaq? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The front gates of the Augustine Culinary Institute opened with the kind of quiet ceremony reserved for elite places. No fanfare, no banners, just an ivy-wrapped archway, and stone walkways that whispered, "You're lucky to be here." The buildings loomed in that colonial chic style that rich schools often favored. White brick, towering glass windows, copper accents buffed to gleam like new pennies. It looked more like a governor's mansion than a school for food, the kind of place where names mattered more than knives. Shaquille O'Neal stood by a black SUV parked just outside the gates, arms folded, eyes hidden behind sleek sunglasses. He didn't dress like the legend he was, just dark jeans, white tee, fresh sneakers. The only thing loud about him was his height and the way the world seemed to pause when it saw him. But he wasn't here to be seen. He was here to send off his daughter. Lennox O'Neal emerged from the passenger side in muted olive cargo pants and a plain black sweatshirt, no designer logos, no loud hair, just a soft high puff, clear skin, and eyes that had seen more than a girl her age should have. She pulled her duffel over one shoulder and glanced once at the building, then up at her father. "You don't have to stay," she said. Shaq smiled, slow and warm. "I know, but I'm gonna." She gave him a look. He shrugged. Old habit. Lennox didn't argue. She just exhaled and started walking toward the gate. She didn't look back, but she didn't need to. She could feel his gaze, solid as a wall behind her. It was all she needed to walk into that place like she belonged. Inside, the orientation hall was elegant. Dark wood paneling, framed photographs of past Michelin stars, and an enormous portrait of Augustine himself, founder and culinary legend, suspended above the stage. Like a benevolent ghost, students trickled in, most accompanied by suited parents and designer luggage. Some wore chef's jackets already, pressed and monogrammed. You could feel the money in the room, not just in the leather chairs and crystal water bottles, but in the posture, the whispers, the careful glances at people's shoes. Lennox sat quietly in the back row, thumbing the edges of her orientation folder. Her seatmate, a tall redhead with piercing green eyes, and an attitude already pouring off her in waves, glanced at her and smirked. "You lose your coat or something?" she asked. "Or do you just like looking like a line cook?" Lennox didn't reply. She didn't need to. The girl turned her attention elsewhere, visibly annoyed at being ignored. That's how it started. Not with slurs, not with screams, with small cuts, disdain dressed up as curiosity, politeness wrapped around judgment. From the stage, a tall man with a chiseled jawline and hair that looked sculpted rather than grown took the mic. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew. "Chef Dorian Flint," someone whispered behind Lennox, reverent like he was a priest. He scanned the room like a man used to being watched. Everything about him was polished. His posture, his words, even the way he placed his hands on the podium. But Lennox noticed the small things. How his eyes lingered a half-second longer on students of color. How his expression tightened every time a name he didn't recognize was read from the orientation list. He wasn't loud. He was precise. And that made him more dangerous. "This is Augustine," he began, voice even, confident. "Not a school, a legacy. You are not here to learn how to cook. You are here to become extraordinary. If you're not ready to bleed, to sweat, to sacrifice your ego, you're in the wrong place." Some students nodded like they were hearing gospel. Others sat a little straighter. Lennox watched him with the same unreadable calm she always wore. He reminded her of critics, people who built walls with language and expected you to feel grateful just for being allowed to nod. After the speech, students were divided into groups and assigned dorms. Names were read. Lennox's was last. Lennox O'Neal, an assistant called, hesitating on the last name. Eyes flicked toward her. One student, freckled, smug, tilted their head. "O'Neal, like the basketball guy?" Lennox met their gaze. "Yeah, like the basketball guy." No one asked more questions, but the buzz began. Not curiosity, not interest, speculation, privilege wrapped in celebrity. They didn't know she had earned her way in. They didn't know she'd spent 5 years cooking under an alias in kitchens where the chef never spoke English, and the heat felt like judgment. All they saw was a name. In the evening, the first practical session was held in the steel lab, a cavernous stainless steel kitchen, with overhead mirrors, individual stations, and the smell of raw ambition in the air. Chef Dorian Flint oversaw the session himself, standing like a general above his army. He called it a palate primer, but it was a test. Each student was given a tray of ingredients, and asked to create a dish that represented who they were as a chef. No time limit, no recipe, no guidance, just stainless steel and silent judgment. Lennox stepped into her station, tied her apron without a word, and began slicing. She didn't look around. She didn't rush. Her movements were quiet, methodical, like someone writing in cursive with a blade, while others fumbled, adjusted heat, second-guessed their seasoning. Lennox moved through her ingredients like she'd already cooked the dish in her mind 1,000 times. Chef Flint passed behind her once, paused, watched her slice a shallot so precisely the layers unfurled like petals. He said nothing, moved on. When the time came to present, Lennox didn't decorate her plate with tweezers or garnish it with unnecessary flair. She laid down a simple seared duck breast, a fig glaze, and parsnip puree. Minimalist, classic, and exactly balanced. She carried it to the front, placed it on the judging table, and returned to her station. Chef Flint approached the plate, looked at it, looked at her. "This yours?" "Yes." "That all?" "That's enough." He frowned, just a flicker. Then he moved on. When the session ended, Lennox exited before feedback was given. On her way out, she passed a small group of students gathered near the lockers. "She thinks she's too good for us," someone muttered. "Nah," said the redhead from earlier. "She knows she's better." You can tell. They didn't know how right they were. Back in her dorm room, Lennox sat on her bed and pulled out a leather-bound journal. No name on the front. Inside were photos, blurry snapshots from kitchens all over the world, a narrow alley behind a Parisian bistro, a grease-slicked wall from a food truck in Detroit, a grainy picture of her in a white coat, standing beside a small plaque that read, "Michelin Guide, 1 star." The name beneath it wasn't hers. She turned the page and stared at a scribbled quote from her father. "Don't let them pull you into noise, baby. Real power is when you don't flinch." Lennox smiled softly, closed the book, and lay back. The school had no idea who she was. No idea what she'd survived to get here. They would learn. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to leave a mark. Quietly, cleanly, completely. And she would. The kitchen echoed with quiet tension that morning. The kind that stretched across stainless steel and ceramic tiles like an invisible wire ready to snap. Students filed into their stations, some yawning behind hands, others clenching knives like they were stepping into battle. A low hum of conversation died down the moment Chef Dorian Flint entered the room. His presence was a click tighter than usual. Shoulders stiffer, jaw set with that particular tightness that only came when something personal was brewing beneath professional control. He scanned the room as though looking for something, or someone. Then his gaze found Lennox O'Neill. She stood in the second row, already in her apron, mise en place arranged with quiet precision, her face unreadable, like stone carved smooth by years of weather. She looked at him once and then looked away, not in defiance, not in fear, just disinterest. That glance was the spark. Whatever ego Dorian had kept contained until then began to crackle in the silence. "Let's skip the morning demo," he announced abruptly. "Today we're doing something instructive." There were a few confused glances, the kind that flicked between students like a nervous tick. Chef Dorian stepped into the front of the lab and picked up a small card from the edge of the counter. His voice carried without needing to rise. "Culinary greatness isn't just about execution. It's about ambition, depth, complexity." He let that linger a moment, before turning to the board behind him, and scribbling the name of a dish, bouillabaisse provençale, modern interpretation. A few audible sighs. Someone whispered, "Seriously?" Dorian turned toward Lennox now, fully, openly. "Miss O'Neill," he said, almost gently, "since you appear so confident in your fundamentals, I'd like to see your take on this classic." Her name lingered in the air like a challenge wrapped in velvet. The entire room froze, students shifting uneasily in their shoes. It wasn't just a dish, it was a test. A complex seafood stew layered with regional nuance, technical balance, and enough variables to trip up any first-year student. Lennox met his eyes but didn't flinch. Any constraints? None, he replied, smiling slightly. Just excellence. She nodded once and turned back to her station. No protests, no hesitation. That calm again. The quiet certainty that made people nervous even when she said nothing. Around her, the others watched with thinly veiled interest. Some smirked, hoping she'd fail. A few pitied her, certain she'd been set up. No one knew who she really was, only that her stillness made them itch. The timer began, and knives hit boards. Pans clattered. The room filled with the frenzy of movement, sweat, and second-guessing. But at Station 9, there was none of that. Lennox peeled shrimp with mechanical grace, her fingers moving with the rhythm of someone who didn't need to measure her pace against the clock. Her broth began early, roasted shells, aromatic herbs, saffron, and a fish base built not just for flavor but for memory. She adjusted heat levels by instinct, not thermometer, and moved through each stage like muscle memory. Chef Flint hovered, watching her with a calculated neutrality. He saw the confidence in her movements and mistook it for arrogance. It infuriated him. She wasn't flustered, wasn't consulting notes, wasn't even watching the other students. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He moved down the line, occasionally barking suggestions, correcting mistakes. But when he passed Lennox again and glanced into her pot, something flickered in his expression, something almost uneasy. He saw clarity where there should have been chaos. Her broth was already reducing. The scent was unmistakable. Balanced acidity, deep seafood, umami, whisper of orange zest and white wine. "How's it coming?" he asked her casually. Lennox didn't look up. "Good. That's all you've got to say?" She added a pinch of fennel pollen and stirred. "It's just a dish." The comment wasn't meant as disrespect, but it hit like one. Dorian stepped back and watched her more closely now. She wasn't scrambling. She wasn't second-guessing. It wasn't supposed to be this easy. Around the room, students battled broken emulsions, overcooked shellfish, and inconsistent reductions. The modern interpretation left room for creativity, but no one had quite figured out how to execute it at this level, except her. She was already plating by the time others were still adjusting seasoning. Her bowl was simple but elegant. The broth shimmered golden against the pale flesh of perfectly poached snapper and prawn. A garnish of micro basil and crisped fennel sat atop a saffron aioli toast. She placed it at the front judging table without a word. Chef Flint watched, unmoving. The room seemed to pause with her. Then she turned and walked out. No fanfare, no final glance, no waiting for feedback. For a second it felt like someone had unplugged the sound from the room. Then it roared back, burners hissing, students scrambling, whispered commentary flaring behind her like sparks. She just left? Did she quit? No, man. She finished early. Chef Flint stared at the dish for a moment, not moving. Then he slowly stepped forward. He didn't speak. He picked up a spoon, dipped into the broth, tasted it, and stilled. The flavor hit like a confession, layered, clean, elevated. The kind of execution that didn't come from practice, but from truth. She hadn't just made a bouillabaisse. She'd rewritten it, maintained the soul, stripped the pretense. Every choice was deliberate, no flourish for its own sake. It was genius dressed in restraint. He set the spoon down without comment and moved on to the next student's plate. After the session, the whispers didn't stop. Students talked in hushed tones in the locker room, in the hallways, even in the dorm common area. Did you see his face when he tasted it? She made it look like child's play. Flint looked like he swallowed glass. And still, Lennox said nothing. She returned to her room, logged notes in her journal, and focused on the next day. Chef Flint, however, did not sleep easily that night. He reviewed security footage of the session, watching her movements like a detective trying to catch a thief. But there were no tricks, no sleights of hand. She was just good, too good. He called the admin office and asked for her file. When it arrived, it was as ordinary as paper, public school background, high test scores, nothing to suggest culinary lineage, no mention of the Michelin star. He stared at the pages for a long time, tapping his pen against the desk. Something didn't add up. The next morning, Lennox arrived early again. Set up, waited, calm as ever. But Dorian didn't speak to her. He avoided her eyes, gave the demo as if yesterday hadn't happened. But the rest of the students had seen enough. One of them, a sharp-eyed boy named Calder, began watching Lennox a little more closely. Not with curiosity, but with suspicion. Something about her didn't line up. Too precise, too calm. He made a mental note to look into it later. And just like that, the ripple began. Lennox had cooked something beautiful. But she hadn't just impressed. She'd disrupted, changed the power structure in the room. And the ones who'd spent their lives mastering appearance felt it shift like tectonic plates beneath them. She hadn't needed validation. She just needed a stove. And she'd used it, like a scalpel. The next morning, the steel lab smelled like caramelized leeks and tension. Students filed into their stations with stiff shoulders and sideways glances, but none of them looked directly at Lennox. They didn't need to. The unspoken atmosphere did the talking. One by one, they set their tools down, their side eyes longer, whispers quieter, yet more weighted than before. Lennox, as always, was already in position, station clean, prep board aligned, sleeves rolled precisely. Chef Dorian Flint walked in 5 minutes late, which was rare. His steps were slower, more deliberate. He didn't start class right away. Instead, he stood at the front table, opened a small leather-bound notebook, and flipped a few pages before closing it again, without reading a word. He looked at Lennox once, then addressed the room without naming her. "There's a difference between cooking a good dish and understanding the soul of one," he said, eyes scanning students like a lighthouse beam. "Yesterday, some of you performed, some of you improvised. One of you," he hesitated ever so slightly, "made something nearly flawless." That nearly was a scalpel. He didn't look at Lennox again. He didn't say her name, but everyone knew who he meant. The subtle exclusion was intentional, calculated, designed to draw a boundary without breaching professionalism. It didn't have to be loud. It just had to be obvious. After class, the whispers began to sharpen. "She came in here like she's been cooking 10 years. Doesn't flinch, doesn't smile. Creepy, right? I heard her dad got her in." Calder Knox leaned against the locker wall, arms folded, earbuds dangling but silent. He wasn't interested in gossip. He was watching. He'd watched her technique yesterday with interest. Then suspicion. Her knife work, her heat timing, her plating precision. It didn't belong to a first year. It belonged to someone far more seasoned. No amateur executed a bouillabaisse like that. Not even a prodigy. He'd seen his father's sous chef fumble that dish on a good day. And yet she made it look routine. He made a note to check something later. Back in the main building, Chef Dorian returned to his office and sat down with the plate still vivid in his mind. He hadn't even critiqued it aloud. He didn't want to. The broth had depth layered like symphony notes, each flavor precise but not arrogant. The seafood had been handled like silk, tender, never over. Even the aioli toast had the exact crisp soft ratio most chefs missed. He'd tasted it once, then again, then a third time just to be sure it wasn't a fluke. It was, but something in him recoiled. Not because of the dish, but because of the cook. A girl who didn't look nervous, who didn't look grateful, who didn't need his approval to know her worth. He leaned back and reached for the admin file again. Flipped through the pages. High school GPA, a few summer internships, test scores. Nothing impressive enough to explain the dish. No culinary lineage listed. No formal kitchen history beyond a vague internship at a catering house in Newark. He ran a hand down his face. And then came the knock. Chef Melissa Groves entered without waiting for permission. She was younger than Dorian, sharper, and far less interested in hierarchy. She dropped a folder on his desk and raised an eyebrow. "You gonna admit she smoked everyone in there yesterday?" she asked flatly. Dorian didn't reply. Melissa folded her arms. "I was at the judging table. I saw your face when you tasted it. So did the students. It was technically solid," he said, tone clipped. "It was Michelin grade," she fired back. "And don't pretend you don't know it." Dorian closed the folder slowly. "Then maybe you can explain why she's not listed on a single regional competition, has no mentorship history, and apparently went straight from public school to this institution with barely a mention in any culinary record." Melissa's gaze narrowed. "So now it's about her resume." "It's about honesty," he said. "No," she corrected him. "It's about control. And you're losing it." She walked out before he could respond. By lunchtime, the energy had shifted completely. Lennox ate alone by the herb garden courtyard. Apple slices, granola bar, a flask of water. Students passed, glancing, murmuring. She didn't engage. Her focus remained on the courtyard fountain, a stone lion spewing a small arc of water. A few of them wanted to talk to her, Others wanted her gone. All of them were watching now. That night, she lay in bed, the glow of the desk lamp casting warm shadows across her open journal. She turned to a blank page, then stopped. Her fingers hovered over a taped photo. It was a snapshot of her and Shaq in a kitchen in Portugal. She was barely 15, standing beside a wood-fire grill with soot on her cheek. He had one arm around her, and was smiling with that unfiltered pride he always wore when she cooked, like every plate was a victory. She remembered the words he told her after a chef tried to sabotage her dish on a youth competition stage. "You don't throw hands, baby. You throw results. They try to rattle you, you cook 'em quiet. Lead with silence, not pride. That's how they'll feel it." She had memorized those words, kept them sharper than any blade. But even silence had its limits. By Thursday, the critiques started to sting with a different edge. "Little too ambitious for someone with your background," Dorian commented after a vinaigrette tasting. "Flavor's good, but maybe focus on fundamentals before you leap," said another instructor, peering too long at her skin instead of her plate. At first, Lennox let it roll off, but repetition became erosion, and erosion made people quiet. One day during a pasta module, she plated a smoked ricotta agnolotti with lemon beurre blanc. The balance was meticulous, but Dorian frowned, barely tasting it. "Lacks vision," he said. Melissa tried to jump in. "It's one of the cleanest executions I've seen all semester." "She plays safe," he replied, eyes never leaving Lennox. "Impressive surface, no soul." Lennox stared at him for a moment, something unreadable flashing in her expression. She didn't argue. She never did, but she never looked away. That night, Calder did his digging. An image search. Just Lennox O'Neill. Wasn't enough. But El Monroe triggered something. A short article buried on a Michelin blog. A photo, blurry, low-res, but there she was, in a white coat, standing beside a modest one-star plaque outside a Lisbon restaurant, under the alias, El Monroe. He clicked on the article. American teen chef earns star in underground Portuguese kitchen. There was no full name, but the smile, the stance, the height. It was her. He leaned back in his chair, grin spreading like wildfire. Well, he didn't tell anyone that night. Not yet. He wanted to watch the fallout when the bomb dropped. Back at the dorms, Lennox stared out the window, night sky hanging low with city glow behind it. Her phone buzzed once. A message from her father. "You okay?" She didn't reply right away, just stared at the words, then typed back slowly. "They're starting to see me." There was a pause. "Then let him look. You're not hiding, baby. You're just cooking." Lennox set the phone down and breathed. They were watching her now. Dorian, the students, the institution itself, but they didn't see all of her. Not yet. They hadn't seen the nights she slept on kitchen floors, the burns hidden beneath her sleeves, the taste tests until her tongue went numb. They hadn't seen her star. Not the plaque, not the title, but the work. Sooner or later they would, because plates don't lie. People do. The announcement came without warning, delivered in Dorian Flint's signature clipped cadence that echoed across the lab like the strike of a cleaver. "This afternoon you'll be participating in a 2-person culinary challenge. Your pairs have already been assigned." Heads jerked up. Pans stilled. Lennox, in her usual place near the back row, paused mid-slice. Her eyes flicked toward Dorian. No smile. No explanation. Just a thinly veiled performance, under the guise of a spontaneous lesson. The timing felt off. The air too charged. This wasn't just about technique. It was about control. Dorian scanned a clipboard, ignoring the quiet buzz of anxiety creeping through the room. Station 5, Lennox O'Neill, Greer Van. A beat of silence. Then a collective exhale, tight and sharp. Even the hissing gas burners couldn't drown out the energy shift. Greer Vance was chaos in Chef White's. Temperamental, erratic, fiercely talented when focused, but more often driven by impulse than discipline. Her outbursts had already become infamous among students. She'd nearly broken a Mandelaine during a sauce critique 2 weeks ago, and once stormed out mid-demo because her garnish wasn't emotionally aligned with the protein. Now she was being paired with the calmest force in the room. It didn't feel like a test. It felt like a trap. Lennox didn't flinch. She set her knife down, wiped the blade, and nodded once. The lab was cleared and reset by noon. Tasting judges from the Institute's board were brought in, given front row seats behind a long glass panel. The brief was straightforward. Prepare a 3-component seafood dish using any available ingredients. Plate it in under 90 minutes. Creativity and execution would be judged in equal measure. The timer started. The kitchen snapped into motion. Greer burst into action, already muttering ideas to herself. No clear plan, just phrases like aggressive citrus and textural play. Lennox stood by, watching the ingredients pile up on their prep station. Too many flavors. Too many contradictions. No vision. "We're doing butter-poached scallops," Greer said, grabbing shallots with one hand, fennel tops with the other, and something crunchy. "Maybe tempura oyster, but not greasy." Lennox took a slow breath. "You're adding too many elements. We won't hit cohesion." Greer shot her a glare. "What? You afraid to flex? I thought you were the secret genius." Lennox ignored the jab. Her hands moved with practiced speed, sorting through the ingredients, removing distractions. She started building structure, mapped plating on a notepad in shorthand, cleaned the station, preheated pans to exact heat zones. But Greer was steamrolling. Tossing ingredients, shifting portions, adjusting temperatures mid-cook. She had the speed of a street chef and the discipline of a jazz drummer on 3 espressos. Lennox didn't argue. She stayed in motion, slicing, tasting, adjusting in micro increments, never clashing, only redirecting. Then it happened. At the 30-minute mark, as Lennox stepped away to retrieve plating bowls, Greer looked at the sauce reduction and frowned. "Too mellow," she muttered, reaching for cayenne and soy. It wasn't the kind of mistake you made by accident. Not when you'd already tasted the balance. It was sabotage. She dumped both into the pan and stirred hard, smirking when Lennox returned. "Thought I'd heat it up a bit," Greer said lightly. Lennox said nothing. She lifted the spoon, tasted the sauce, and immediately knew. Overpowering, acidic, burnt with spice. It would mask every note they'd built. There was no panic in her eyes. No flash of anger. She looked at the sauce, then at the remaining ingredients. She calculated in seconds. "We don't have time to redo it," Greer added, stepping back like a performer watching the show unravel. Lennox moved. She strained the sauce, pulled a backup stock, reset aromatics, added celery root, and a shaving of white miso to neutralize the spice. The broth was rebuilt in minutes, simmering at a higher heat, without reducing clarity. She used a chilled mixing bowl to quick temper the cream. She didn't speak once. The dish pivoted completely. Out went the scallops. In came poached halibut cheeks, preserved lemon, a flash-seared ribbon of cucumber for crunch. She adjusted the emulsified foam on the fly, piped it last minute, just before the plating window. Greer watched from a step behind, eyes narrowed, arms folded. Her plan hadn't worked, and yet, Lennox hadn't called her out, hadn't accused her. She'd just adapted. When the final plate was laid in front of the judges, white halibut over saffron potato puree, cucumber curls, and a pale citrus miso froth, the panel leaned forward. The dish looked like restraint with teeth. They tasted, murmured, nodded. Even Dorian, standing in the far corner, shifted slightly. Greer blinked at the result. It wasn't just good. It was excellent, but not in a flashy, overworked way. The flavors were tight, harmonious, impossibly salvaged from near collapse. And the way Lennox moved, clean, precise, always one step ahead. It didn't look like instinct. It looked like memory. She stared at the knife Lennox had used. Every slice of fennel, every shaving of preserved lemon had been identical. Paper-thin, uniform, surgical. That wasn't student skill. That was professional muscle memory. Greer didn't say anything as Lennox wiped down the station, returned tools to their exact slots, and turned to walk out again. Before results were read, before applause, before judgment. Same as last time. The judges scored. Their dish landed at the top. Dorian said nothing. But inside, something began to churn. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. He had tested her with chaos, and she'd turned it into elegance. And still she didn't seek praise. Later that night, Greer caught Lennox in the locker hallway. No students around, just the sharp scent of lemon cleaner and metal. "You knew I'd mess with the sauce," Greer said, not as a question. Lennox didn't break stride. "Yes," Greer exhaled, half laugh, half growl. "So why didn't you call me out? Get me disqualified. Wouldn't have helped the plate." Greer shook her head, leaning against the lockers. "You're not normal, you know that?" Lennox glanced at her, something faint in her eyes. Amusement. Maybe. Normal's overrated.
You cook like someone who's done this before. A lot.
Lennox didn't respond. Greer tilted her head. Your cuts, those fennel slices, that's not student work. That's muscle memory. Still Lennox remained silent. Then she walked away. Greer stood alone, arms crossed, lips pressed. She wasn't mad anymore. She was curious, maybe even impressed. But curiosity had teeth in this place, and people were already starting to bite. By the next morning, the whispers had grown legs. Calder had started showing people the Michelin blog post on his phone, not announcing it, just letting them see. Word moved fast, faster than the sauce had burned. Instructors began noticing. Students watched Lennox like they were seeing her for the first time. Chef Flint? He stood at the edge of the lab that morning, eyes narrowed, heart pounding with something between fear and fascination. She had passed every test, but more importantly, she'd dodged every trap. The walls were cracking, and she hadn't raised her voice once. The truth didn't explode. It leaked, like steam from an unattended stockpot. Slow, silent, and suddenly everywhere. It began with a link. Calder Knox, known less for his cooking and more for his last name, had found the article late one night, buried beneath obscure culinary blogs and outdated Michelin announcements. A blurry photo, a name that wasn't quite Lennox's, Elle Monroe, but it was her, standing outside a one-star restaurant in Lisbon, half smile on her face, fire in her eyes. He hadn't planned to share it, not at first, but once you have a match in your hand, it's hard not to strike it. By morning, the article was being passed from phone to phone in the common room, shared in hushed clusters of students who didn't speak Lennox's name out loud, but exchanged looks heavy with revelation. The same girl they'd dismissed, challenged and whispered about, had already achieved the thing they were all chasing. Quietly, without fanfare, without even trying to use it. Chef Dorian received the link before lunch, printed and anonymously slid under his office door. He stared at the page for a long time, read it once, then again. He didn't speak, didn't move, just let the article sit there like it was something rotten. It wasn't just the star. It was the secrecy, the implication that she'd entered his domain with a masked credential, that she'd made him into a fool, without ever raising her voice. His pride curled inward, sharp as vinegar. By the time Lennox was called into his office, the students had already cleared a silent path for her. Not out of reverence, not out of fear, out of curiosity. They didn't know what to expect from her anymore. She wasn't just a classmate now. She was a story, one they hadn't been told properly. The office was cold, all glass and steel, framed certificates on the wall like medals. Lennox walked in, stood without being asked to sit. Dorian remained seated, elbows on the desk, fingers tented like he was preparing for a negotiation. But there would be no negotiation. So, he said, "You're Elle Monroe." Lennox didn't respond. He lifted the printed article and tapped it. Michelin star at 16. Lisbon. Pseudonym. No formal mentorship. Underground kitchen. The culinary world's little mystery. Still, she said nothing. You chose not to disclose this in your application. Why? Silence. Dorian leaned forward, voice tighter. Because you thought it would be more dramatic to reveal yourself. You thought it would win you respect to play the humble prodigy. Lennox met his eyes calmly. I didn't come here to be discovered. I came to learn. Dorian's jaw tightened. You misrepresented yourself. You've manipulated your peers, your instructors, this entire institution. I didn't lie, she said. By omission you did. She took a breath, steady, like she'd been preparing for this moment long before it arrived. You didn't ask. And if you had, it would have changed how you treated me. His fingers curled into his palm. You mean it would have earned you immunity? No, I mean it would have earned me your resentment earlier. That landed like a slap, though her voice never rose. She wasn't trying to fight. She was trying to be understood. But Dorian didn't want to understand. He wanted her small, manageable, normal. You used this place, he snapped, as a vanity exercise. You weren't here to grow. You were here to prove something, at our expense. She shook her head slowly. I was here because I never got to be a student. Because every kitchen I worked in saw a name or a story instead of a person. I wanted to cook without a shadow. You think you're the only one with expectations? He barked. Everyone in the school has something to prove. She didn't flinch. Then why are you punishing me for succeeding? The room fell into a heavy, bitter silence. Then Dorian stood. You're suspended. 1 week. Off record. For now. She raised an eyebrow. For what violation? For breach of institutional trust. She nodded once. Said nothing else. Then turned and walked out. No argument. No request for leniency. Just quiet steps across tile and out the door. The next morning, her station was empty. Her knives were gone. The lab felt different. Quieter, somehow heavier. Even Greer Vance, normally the loudest flame in the room, was subdued. Students chopped and sautéed with a strange caution, like waiting for something to snap. Even Dorian seemed off kilter. He gave no sharp critiques, offered no sideways glances. His voice lacked its usual command. It was the absence of Lennox, and the presence of something they couldn't name. Guilt, maybe, or shame. Melissa Groves confronted him in the break room. You suspended her, she asked, voice low. She concealed a credential. Melissa folded her arms. She earned that credential, and she never once used it to her advantage. She misled us. She survived us. Dorian looked away. She disrupted the order of this place. Melissa narrowed her eyes. Maybe it needed disrupting. He didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew. Lennox hadn't manipulated the system. She had exposed it. She hadn't asked for recognition. But she'd forced people to reckon with their assumptions. And for Dorian, that truth was harder to swallow than any undercooked steak. During her absence, something strange happened. Students stopped whispering. They started cooking quieter, cleaner, more deliberate, as if her presence, even in absence, had shifted their expectations of excellence. No longer performative, just sincere. Greer, who had once tried to sabotage her, now found herself staring at the empty station next to hers, like it was unfinished business. She hadn't expected to miss Lennox. But she did. Not as competition, as calibration. Lennox had made her sharper, without ever saying a word. A week passed. No one filled her station. No one dared. And still, Dorian watched the door. Because he knew. She wasn't done. Not yet. The day he walked in, the weather was ordinary. Blue sky, soft sun, a breeze just strong enough to carry the scent of rosemary from the kitchen garden. Inside the Augustine Culinary Institute, the clatter of knives, the bark of instructions, and the low hum of ambition filled the air as usual. But at 9:43 a.m., the rhythm shifted. He didn't need to announce himself. The lobby went quiet the moment his frame crossed the threshold. 6 feet 11 inches of calm authority, wrapped in a tailored charcoal overcoat, white tee underneath, and sneakers that barely made a sound across the marble floor. He didn't smile, he didn't scan for attention. He simply stood, hands in his pockets, eyes tracking the room with measured stillness. A receptionist at the front desk fumbled with her pen. Can I help you? Shaquille O'Neal nodded once, polite. I'd like to speak with the head of the school. Do you have an appointment? She asked, voice catching on habit. No. But I'll wait. She blinked, uncertain. Sir, if you tell me your name. I'd rather not, he said with the gentleness of someone who rarely had to repeat himself. It didn't take long for the whisper to travel. By the time Dorian Flint got word that a very large visitor was requesting a meeting, a low tremor had already rolled through the faculty. Dorian came downstairs expecting a parent, perhaps another entitled athlete father, ready to argue for his daughter's re-entry. He didn't expect to find him. The man who towered over basketball courts. The man who had quietly raised one of the most disciplined students Dorian had ever underestimated. Shaq stood when he approached. Mr. O'Neal, Dorian began, extending a hand. Shaq looked at it, then shook it once. Call me Shaq. Dorian gestured toward the hallway. We can speak in my office. Shaq nodded and followed. Inside, the office felt smaller than usual. Dorian perched behind his desk like a man trying to maintain the illusion of control. But the space belonged to Shaq now, not because of his height, not because of his name, but because he brought silence with him, the kind that made you question every assumption. I'm here about my daughter, Shaq said simply. Dorian folded his hands. Lennox is a gifted student. But I'm not here to argue, Shaq interrupted, voice smooth. I'm not here to ask you for anything. Dorian leaned back, cautious. Then what do you want? Shaq glanced around the room, then settled his gaze on the framed accolades behind the desk. When I was her age, he began, my mom Lucille worked 2 jobs, told me every day, don't let the world tell you who you are. Show him. She didn't have fancy degrees, or chef coats. She had a voice, and she made sure I used mine when it mattered. He paused. Let that sink in. But Lennox? She learned something different. She learned to let silence do the work, because sometimes, speaking means they stop listening. But cooking? They can't ignore that. Dorian's jaw tensed. Shaq continued. Measured. You saw what she could do. Not once, not twice, over and over. And still, instead of asking why she hides her name, you asked how dare she. Dorian looked away, just for a second. You know what it's like, Shaq added, to walk into a room and be seen as a threat just because you're excellent and black? Silence. Shaq leaned forward slightly. No? Then let me tell you how it works. They question you louder when you're quiet. They challenge you harder when you're right. They punish you deeper when you don't beg. I didn't punish her, Dorian muttered. Defensive. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Didn't you? Dorian didn't respond. My daughter earned that star. In a foreign kitchen, under a name that let her cook in peace. She didn't bring that here to flaunt it. She brought it here to bury it. Because she wanted to earn her place without shortcuts. He stood now, slow and steady, voice low. You could have lifted her. Instead, you tried to level her. That's not education. That's control. Dorian's mouth opened, then closed. Shaq looked at him one last time. I'm not asking you to change the system. I'm just asking you not to be the reason someone walks away from it. Then he left. No threat. No headline. Just truth. That night, Dorian didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, the printed Michelin article beside him, Lennox's file open again. But he wasn't reading. He was remembering. Every dish she'd plated. Every time she walked out without waiting for his words. Every critique she swallowed without flinching. Every subtle correction she made under pressure. Every calm choice in chaos. He pulled up the lab's archived footage, watched in silence. There she was. Rebuilding a ruined sauce in minutes. Correcting salt ratios by instinct. Managing Greer's implosions without a single raised voice. Anticipating kitchen breakdowns before they happened. Her hands steady, her eyes precise. Every movement measured. This wasn't defiance. It was discipline. The kind he used to admire. Before his pride got in the way, he watched 3 full hours of her lab sessions. No sound, just visuals. The shape of her focus. The restraint. The mastery. Then he replayed the moment he called her in. Her stillness. Her refusal to argue. The dignity she carried when she left. Not broken. Not bitter. Just gone. He turned off the screen and sat in the dark, eyes burning. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves rustled against glass. The building around him, once a monument to order, felt fragile, like something had shifted beneath the marble. And in the quiet he whispered the truth to no one. He'd been wrong. The flyer went up without fanfare. No announcement, no faculty meeting. Just a single clean sheet pinned to the bulletin board outside the lab. Augustine Institute. Blind tasting challenge. All levels. Anonymous entry. Dishes judged by external Michelin reviewers. 3 winners. No names on plates. Only numbers. At first students read it with passing curiosity. Then the whispers started. The timing. The judges. The sudden formality. Everyone knew it wasn't just another challenge. It was a reset. A chance to start fresh, free from politics, favoritism, or prejudice. Chef Dorian Flint stood in the back during morning prep. Arms folded, gaze fixed on nothing in particular. He didn't speak of the flyer, didn't nudge anyone toward it. But something in the way he moved, slower, more thoughtful, suggested that this wasn't just another culinary exercise. This was penance, constructed in steel and taste. And she returned the day after it went up. Lennox walked in quietly. No drama, no greetings. She entered the lab at 6:12 a.m., before the first station had been unlocked. Apron already folded in her bag. Her boots echoed once across the tile. Then silence. The few students who saw her said nothing. Some looked away. Some watched. Even Greer Vance, posted up by the espresso machine, froze mid-sip. Their eyes met, but Greer didn't speak. Just nodded once. A truce. Lennox nodded back and kept walking. She didn't reclaim her old station. She chose one closer to the end of the room, out of the spotlight, out of Dorian's eye line. When he entered 20 minutes later, he saw her but said nothing. Not out of avoidance, out of choice. He didn't trust his words yet. He only hoped his actions would start to matter more than his silence ever had. The tasting was scheduled for Friday. Each student would cook one dish, plated and tagged only with a randomly assigned number. The judging panel would be comprised of 3 guest chefs, including 2 Michelin inspectors from out of state. No introductions, no clues, just flavor. Instructors were not exempt. Dorian would taste and score just like the others. Equal footing, no bias. Lennox signed up late Wednesday night. The only clue that she'd entered was a number assigned to her station on the prep list. By Friday morning, tension buzzed through the building. 17 students, 2 visiting scholars, and 3 teaching chefs, all geared up. The kitchen smelled like possibilities: sharp citrus, aged beef, smoked mushroom, seared duck, toasted sesame. Everyone was cooking with intention. Lennox prepped a dish with almost no wasted motion, no notes, no hesitation. She chose lamb loin, a protein she hadn't touched once during her time at Augustine. Roasted bone-in, wrapped in seaweed salt crust, served with a charred leek puree, pickled ramps, and a reduction made from plum vinegar and black garlic. A single-grain salad on the side spelt toasted pine nut, a whisper of orange blossom, balanced, elegant, unflashy. She plated last, wiped the rim and stepped back. Her hands didn't tremble. She placed her plate in the lineup like any other. No sign that the girl who had quietly dismantled the old kitchen hierarchy was back in the race. Then she returned to her station, cleaned her tools, and sat back straight, expression unreadable. The judges entered through a separate corridor. 3 of them, coats pressed, clipboards blank. Dorian followed behind them, uncharacteristically quiet, his own scorecard tucked beneath his arm. The room was cleared. Students waited outside while dishes were tasted. One by one the plates were sampled, notes taken, rankings silently compiled. The only sound in the lab was the scrape of forks and the click of pens. When they reached plate Tim 38, Dorian didn't flinch. He didn't know whose it was. That was the point. He took a bite, lamb first. The crust cracked perfectly, the seasoning deep, but not aggressive. The puree held earthiness and smoke. The salad cut clean through the weight. The reduction had a sweetness that lingered, not loud, but confident. He paused, took a second bite. His eyes changed. He circled a number on his card. The panel continued without comment. All 3 scored the plates individually, numbers tallied by a student liaison outside the room. Results would be posted on the bulletin board the next morning. The next day arrived heavy with unspoken anticipation. Even the hallways seemed to wait. At 7:00 a.m., the paper was pinned to the board, names beside numbers, rankings listed clearly. First place, N38, Lennox O'Neill. Second place, 11, Calder Knox. Third place, John 24, Greer Vance. Lennox wasn't even there when it went up. She arrived 20 minutes later, coffee in hand, bag slung across her shoulder. A few students glanced toward her as she approached. Some smiled, some nodded, but no one said anything. She stopped, read the list, then walked straight into the lab. Dorian was already inside. He looked up when she entered. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. Then he stepped forward. "I didn't know it was yours," he said quietly. She didn't smile. That was the point. He nodded. "I ranked it highest." A beat of silence.
"I believe you," she said.
There was no gloating in her tone. No edge. Just the same calm she always carried. Like still water that ran deeper than most people ever understood. Dorian exhaled. "You shouldn't have had to prove it that way." "But I did." He looked away, then back. "You taught me something." She raised an eyebrow. He continued, voice steady. "That there's a difference between running a kitchen and leading one. And I've been doing more of the first." A long pause passed between them. Then Lennox picked up her apron from the hook and tied it.
"I'm here to cook," she said.
Dorian stepped aside. The lab began to fill again. Students trickling in. Some with newfound respect, others with quiet admiration. No one questioned her place anymore. The results had done what words couldn't. At her station, Lennox cleaned her cutting board and unrolled her knives. Her hands moved with the same rhythm as always, but her shoulders sat just a little higher. Not proud, just free. Redemption hadn't come with applause. It had come through a number, a plate, and the quiet satisfaction of being seen for the work. Nothing else. And sometimes, that was enough. The invitation came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Handwritten, folded once. Left on Lennox's station. No dramatic gesture, No staff announcement, just a note penned in Dorian's tight, careful script. Office, 5:15. Just up. Lennox didn't flinch when she read it. She finished her prep work, cleaned her knives, rolled her linen with the same silent care as always. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Something had shifted. Not just in the school, but in the way people looked at her. Less curiosity now. More clarity. Respect not granted by speech, but earned. Again and again, by what she built on the plate. When she stepped into Dorian's office, he was already standing. Not behind his desk this time. Not perched in the posture of power. He stood by the window, hands loose at his sides, backlit by the soft fade of a late-day sun. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded once. "You asked." He gestured toward the chair across from his. She didn't sit. She leaned against the wall. Instead, arms folded loosely, eyes steady. This wasn't her seeking. This was her listening. Dorian took a slow breath. "I owe you an apology." Lennox didn't blink. "Okay. I failed to see what was in front of me," he continued. "Your skill, your discipline, the way you carried yourself through everything thrown at you. I misread all of it." "You didn't misread," she said calmly. "You decided." He closed his eyes briefly, accepting the blow. "You're right." There was silence again. The kind that wasn't awkward, just heavy with what hadn't been said yet. Lennox let it sit. Then she spoke. Not fast, not sharp, just clear. "You judged me before I ever touched a knife. Before I ever chopped a shallot or plated a single course. You assumed I had something to prove. But what I really had was something to protect." Dorian stayed quiet. "My name isn't just a name. It's a trigger. It opens doors in some rooms. It closes them in others. And in this building, this very elite, very white institution, it was easier to let you believe I was just a student from Newark who lucked her way in." He lowered his gaze. "Because I knew the moment you learned who I really was," she continued, "you wouldn't see the work anymore. You'd see what you thought the work meant. Arrogance, advantage, inheritance, anything but effort. I never meant." "I'm not interested in what you meant," Lennox said, but her tone held no venom. "I'm interested in what you did." He nodded slowly. "You're right again." Lennox pushed off the wall, walked to the window beside him. She looked out, nodded him. "I've been underestimated before, doubted, tokenized. But what made this place different was how quiet it all was. How polite, no slurs, no shouting, just smaller portions of trust, constant questioning, and praise wrapped in skepticism." Dorian's throat tightened. "You call that feedback," she added. "But it's something else when it only flows one way." He didn't try to defend himself this time. He stood there, quiet, listening like he should have done months ago. She looked at him now, and for the first time, there was a trace of something close to softness, not forgiveness, but honesty. "You taught me technique," she said. "You pushed me, and that mattered, but you also taught me how power protects itself, and how much work it takes to be seen without permission." Dorian breathed out through his nose, then reached for the envelope on his desk. "I want to offer you something," he said, sliding it toward her. "A position, co-instructor, adjunct. We want to add a student-led kitchen rotation, and I want you to design it, from scratch." Lennox looked at the envelope, then back at him. "I'm flattered," she said, "but I'm not taking it." His face faltered. "I'm not here to fix what this place broke. That's not my job," she said, "but I'll recommend someone who can help." He tilted his head, confused. "Greer," she said simply. His brow lifted. "Greer Vance?"
Lennox nodded. She was chaotic, impulsive, but she's grown. She's learned from her mistakes, and she sees the system clearly now. She still questions things, but she also knows what it's like to sabotage and be forgiven. That's who you want helping others grow.
Dorian processed that. "She tried to tank your dish. She also changed," Lennox replied. "I don't believe in burning bridges just because someone once tried to burn mine. Greer's not perfect, but she's real, and that matters more." He was quiet for a long time. "Systems don't change from the top," Lennox said. "They change when the ones at the bottom start teaching." She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "You've got the power to keep things the same," she said, "or the courage to let them evolve." Then she was gone. Later that day, Dorian called Greer into his office. She entered cautiously, arms crossed like a shield. He offered her the envelope Lennox had refused. She stared at it. You're serious? Yes. And this isn't some trap. He shook his head. Lennox recommended you. Greer's expression cracked, disbelief mixed with something close to guilt. After what I pulled on her. She believes in second chances, he said. Do you? She took the envelope slowly, eyes lingering on it, like it might vanish. Yeah, she whispered. I think I do. That evening, Lennox didn't return to the dorms. She took the long way home through the city, earbuds in, boots scuffing against sidewalk. The sky turned lavender overhead. Somewhere behind her, the institute buzzed with change. Small, slow, but real. She passed a little bakery near Westwood, where she used to sit as a kid with her dad, eating warm sugar-dusted pastries before he dropped her at practice. She paused at the window and smiled. She had walked into that school as someone hiding. She walked out as someone seen. Not for the name, not for the resume, for the fire that didn't lie. The kitchen wasn't grand, no copper fixtures or imported granite, just an old church basement space, repurposed into something functional, fluorescent lights overhead, hand-me-down stoves, counters patched with mismatched tile, but the oven still warmed like a heartbeat, and the smell of cinnamon and browned butter rolled through the room like memory. Lennox stood at the center, no chef's coat, no title stitched to her chest, just a navy sweatshirt, sleeves rolled, flowers smudged along her forearm. Her curls were pulled back, her earrings modest, but her presence filled the room the way heat settles. Slow, steady, unmistakable. Around her, 12 kids, ages 8 to 16, stood at folding prep tables, their hands clumsy but eager. Some wore aprons 2 sizes too big, some had never cracked an egg before today. They weren't here for grades. They were here for warmth, for the joy of creation, and Lennox gave it to them freely. Okay, she said, lifting a mixing bowl. Who remembers the 3 rules of kitchen respect? A small hand shot up. Elliot, the shy 10-year-old with big eyes and a louder whisk than sense. Clean as you go, he said quickly. Taste everything, and don't throw shade. Laughter rippled through the room. Lennox grinned. Perfect. Especially that last one. In the corner, leaning against the doorway with arms folded and eyes soft, stood Shaquille O'Neal. His frame filled the archway, but he didn't make a sound, just watched, let the moment bloom. This was why he'd built the place. His community center in the south end of the city, not for trophies or cameras, but for this, a space where something good could grow. And now, his daughter was the one planting seeds. The class went on for 2 hours. They made fresh pasta hand-rolled, cut unevenly, flour coating every surface. They baked chocolate banana bread, the kind that cracked perfectly down the center, steam curling up the second it left the oven. And they laughed, not performatively, just fully freely. Among the quiet audience near the door sat one person no one expected. A man in a tan trench coat, notebook in hand. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask questions, just scribbled between bites of banana bread, watching Lennox like he was taking notes for a eulogy or an award. His name was Julian Rowe, a longtime food critic for a local paper turned national blog. He'd been tipped off by Melissa Groves, discreetly. Without Lennox's knowledge, Julian had been to hundreds of restaurants, reviewed Michelin-starred chefs and flame-out phenom, but something about this room kept him from blinking too long. There was no ego here, no performance, just intention. After the kids filed out, arms full of take-home containers and flour-speckled grins, Lennox finally exhaled. She leaned on the counter sipping water, cheeks pink from the oven, and the effort. Shaq walked over, offered a small towel. She took it, wiped her hands, leaned into his shoulder for a beat. You proud? She asked, without looking up. He didn't answer right away. I'm full, he said finally. She chuckled. That's the banana bread. He gave her a look. She smiled, and for a moment the world slowed. Outside, Julian Rowe stepped into the fading evening, still writing. He didn't plan to file a formal review. Not really, but the words kept coming, and by the time he hit publish, the headline read, Where Grace Lives, a star without a spotlight. The piece spread fast. It didn't brag about her accolades. It didn't list her dishes. It talked about the look in a child's eyes when Lennox taught them how to hold a knife safely. It talked about how her father didn't hover, didn't boast, just watched like he was seeing his own legacy rewrite itself in real time. It described the smell of caramel and cracked earth in her banana bread, The way she paused between instructions to listen, not just teach. The way she moved like someone who had nothing left to prove, and everything left to give. It ended with a line that caught fire. Some chefs cook to be seen. Lennox O'Neill cooks so others can taste themselves in her food. And in a world that loves applause, she teaches us what it means to cook quietly and matter loudly. The article went viral in a way she didn't expect. Lennox didn't comment, didn't tweet. She kept showing up to the community kitchen every Saturday, like she had before anyone knew her name. Like nothing had changed. But in a small apartment 2 blocks from Augustin, Chef Dorian Flint read the article on a cracked iPad. He was sitting alone at his kitchen table, surrounded by empty recipe journals and coffee mugs from years of student gifts. He didn't finish the piece right away. He paused halfway, overwhelmed by something he couldn't name. Then, slowly, he picked up a pen. The note was short. Lennox, I spent years chasing precision. You reminded me that it's nothing without purpose. Thank you for showing us what strength really looks like. And for cooking like it's a conversation, not a competition. DM. He folded the card, slid it into an envelope, and mailed it without a return address. A week later, Lennox found it tucked between local bills and pantry donation receipts. She read it once, then tucked it into her journal without a word. She didn't need to reply. She had already said what she needed to. That evening, she stood in the back of the kitchen, wiping down the counters after the last class. One of the younger girls had drawn a picture, a crayon sketch of Lennox wearing a chef's hat, stars around her, a giant spoon in one hand, and a fire burning in the oven behind her. She hung it on the fridge with a magnet. No plaque, no fanfare, just a drawing from someone who saw her for who she really was. In that warm, unpolished room, surrounded by kids who didn't know Michelin from mac and cheese, Lennox had become exactly what she never chased. A legend. The sun filtered through linen curtains, golden and soft, washing the kitchen in that early morning light that makes everything feel slower, safer. The tile beneath Lennox's bare feet was cool, grounding. A tea kettle whistled low in the background. A half-peeled orange sat on the counter beside a mixing bowl filled with cracked eggs and black pepper. The whole place smelled like butter and toast, and something gently sweet she hadn't even added yet. She moved without thought now, hand on the skillet, wrist flicked just enough to keep the eggs from sticking. There was jazz playing low on the old radio perched on the windowsill. Coltrane, maybe. Or something close. The kind of music that didn't beg to be noticed but stayed with you anyway. Behind her, the chair scraped softly as Shaq took his usual place at the small round table by the window. It barely fit his frame, legs stretched underneath, like a man trying to hide his wingspan. Across from him, Lucille O'Neill smoothed the corner of the paper and gave her son a knowing look. "Don't you burn that toast again, big man?" she warned playfully. Shaq grinned. Wide and easy. That was 1 time. 3 times. 1 time, he insisted. Just prolonged. Lennox smiled without turning around, plating scrambled eggs with chives, roasted tomato slices, and 2 slices of just right toast. She set one in front of Lucille, the other in front of her father. Then she joined them, cradling her own coffee mug, breathing in the stillness. They didn't talk about the articles, or the institute, or the way her name had quietly floated into food blogs and word-of-mouth lists like a ghost finally showing its face. They didn't talk about the thank you note Dorian had sent, or how Greer had taken over the student-led kitchen program and was thriving in ways no one expected. They didn't need to. Lucille stirred her tea with the kind of grace that made it feel like a ritual. "You used to burn eggs," she said softly. "I used to be afraid of fire," Lennox replied, sipping her coffee. Lucille nodded, understanding in her eyes. Shaq took a bite, chewed, pointed at his plate. "This is better than anything I ever had on the road." Lennox tilted her head. "Even that shrimp place in New Orleans? Especially that shrimp place. They use too much garlic. You ordered double garlic." "That's not the point." They laughed, and it echoed around the kitchen like a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. On the counter beside the fridge was a stack of notebooks. Lennox's journals, filled with sketches, menus, flavor experiments, and memories. One of them had a torn page tucked inside, a drawing a child had made of her holding a spoon like a sword, stars around her. She hadn't framed it, just kept it near, a quiet reminder of what she'd built when no one was watching. Lucille leaned back, sipping. "You seem lighter." Lennox nodded. I stopped waiting for permission. "To what?" Shaq asked. To be me. He met her eyes then, full of pride, but not the loud kind. The kind that shows up in the silence between words.
You always were, he said.
The morning unfolded slow and soft, jazz melting into background hum, plates cleaned, dishes done without being asked. Lennox moved around the space like she owned it, not with authority, but with comfort, like someone who had finally arrived home after years of moving in disguise. Lucille sat with a crossword puzzle. She didn't really want to finish. Shaq scrolled through his phone, chuckling now and then at videos of dogs doing backflips and old teammates trying to dance on TV. Lennox opened a window. Let the fresh air in. It smelled like grass and a little rain even though the sky was still clear. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was chasing anything. Not validation, not recognition, not approval. The journey had taken her through pressure and doubt and shadows, and it had brought her here to this table. This morning, this piece. She hadn't reclaimed her name. She'd rewritten it. Later, as they finished their second round of toast, this one intentionally overdone, for nostalgia's sake, Shaq pushed his chair back, stretching. You still thinking about that next step, he asked. Lennox looked out the window. No rush. Lucille arched an eyebrow. You? No rush? Lennox smiled. I've earned a pause. There was no launch plan yet. No restaurant announcement. No book deal. She had offers, of course. Messages in her inbox from investors, producers, journalists. But none of that moved her. What did was the kid who had cried after making his first grilled cheese. The woman who stopped her in the grocery aisle to say her daughter had started cooking because of her. The moment she realized she didn't have to compete anymore because she'd already won the only thing that mattered, her voice. She took her empty mug to the sink, rinsed it, turned back to see her father and grandmother watching her with the same quiet awe they always had. Like she was still 5 years old, feet swinging beneath the table, butter on her chin. But this time, there was something different. Respect. Not for what she'd accomplished, but for who she had chosen to be. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the corners of the kitchen. The jazz on the radio faded into something softer, just piano now, slow and bright. Lennox walked back to the table, sat down again. Lucille leaned over, touched her hand. You're home. I know, Lennox said. They didn't say more. They didn't need to. Because sometimes the most powerful moments come not with applause or fire, but with the smell of toast, the sound of laughter, and the feeling of being fully quietly seen. Some stories don't end in fire. Some end in warmth. If this story stirred something in you, keep your eyes on the fire. Where there's quiet courage, there's more to uncover. Because legends don't announce themselves. They simmer, they rise, and they return. And trust us, Lennox's journey was just the first course.